So, hello everybody, and thank you very much for attending our webinar on digital communications in public institutions. I'm Sirnik, Communication Officer at the CEF, and I'll be moderating the discussion in the next hour and a half of this webinar. So before we continue, let's go through some technical information, which will be explained by my colleague Aida Turk, who works on CEF Online Learning Initiative.
Welcome to this webinar. Here are some technical information for you. This webinar is recorded, and after it, we will share the presentations and recording with you in a couple of next days. For any question that you have during this webinar, please use chat function. You can find chat column just on the right of your screen below all the names. So first you have the participants tab, then you have chat, and there you can send to everybody your message. So maybe just to check if everybody knows where it is, please say something. You type in your message. Right of your screen, under participants, you have to click on the arrow chat, and then you will see the chat part. Thank you, Nona, Gagwen, thank you for responding. And I just encourage you to send it to everyone so that anybody can see your message. Yes, thank you. Okay, and the last information would be that we would like you to stay muted. It's this red microphone right to your name so that we can ensure better sound quality. And this would be it. If you have any questions, please post it in the queue.
So thank you very much, Aida. And to go back to the webinar on digital communications in public institutions. So we decided with my colleagues to address the topic of digital communications in public institutions because new communication channels, especially social media, changing the traditional role of public relations and communication with citizens. And as a consequence, then practitioners working on this face new practical challenges and are expected to have new knowledge and skills. So today's webinar, we therefore aim to showcase examples of good digital communication practices with some straightforward tips that institutions can use for external communication, and hopefully you will be able to adapt and apply this then to your own work. At this point, I would also like to thank you for your feedback on the survey that we shared with you. The results helped us and our speakers in preparation for the inputs to this webinar. Let's take a look at the agenda. So, in the first part, we have 3 speakers with rich experience from digital communication field, and they will showcase examples of good digital communication practices in this first part. We will start with Lucas, our colleague from CEF Communication team. Lucas' presentation will be followed by a presentation of Richard Medic. He is digital communication specialist and founder of Happeningo Communications and Soon Feed Media. The presenter will be Matthew Jacobs, digital coordinator for the Bureau of European and Eurasian Affairs at the U.S. Department of State. And in the second part of the webinar, we will dedicate time to your questions. So, as I already explained, you can post questions in written using the chat function. And you can post questions throughout the entire webinar, and we will then address them in the second part, in the last half an hour of this webinar. So now I would like to give the word to my colleague from CEF Communications team, Luka Zupancic, and he will present how CEF communicates with our audience via digital communication channels, especially how we use social media. So Luka, the word is yours.
Okay, Polona. Hope everybody can hear me. I will show you digital communications. Some of you already know, CEF is an international organization that supports capacity development for finance officials through its learning program platform for knowledge exchange. Here is our website that compiles different digital communications channels. We are a learning institution. We know that social media present an integral part of our communication strategy. Our main media channels are listed in the icons here. They are Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. With the increased use of social media, it is important to understand how this phenomenon can be leveraged also for learning. We communicate in order to increase the visibility of our activities. Participant partners and social media enable low-cost and high-impact communicating with target audiences. In addition to support reforms through learning, we started to create digital stories or learning initiatives that compile highlights of discussions, presentation, other activities, learning event, and posts on different social media channels at one place. I will show you where these stories can be reached on our website, for example, through this hyperlink. These digital stories help us beyond classroom in order to provide followers with an interactive and real-time experience of our learning initiatives. They serve also as a report of the event activities, and finally, they increase the visibility of participants and donor partners. Here is an example of one such digital story. It starts with the introductory text with some icons of the supported example, with the introductory video, and with the first day of the workshop. So you can see this a report through a learning event all the way to the last day of the workshop, with different photos, with different, for example, Twitter also, posts and whatever. A learning tool that broadens learning the classroom are learning nuggets. These are videos of 3 to 5 minutes with experts at our learners who present particular topic on CEF YouTube account. Here it is, and also the other already before mentioned social media channels. We also have a knowledge hub blog that allows us to publish our experience and the experience of our partners with learning. This blog, we and so other international experts share their insights in learning experience. Recently introduced on our website a learning resources, which where participants share their views on different topics. For example, how they do reforms in their own countries. These are short papers, also videos, etc. We'll conduct value creation stories. This is the qualitative part of our wider monitoring and evaluation framework. These stories show how change in behavior traverses different cycles, of how learning events have created value for participants, the organizations, and stakeholders. We publish these stories on our website under Voices from the Region. So these are interviews with the participants, their feedback on the impact of learning events. A similar category is also the voices of donors, where partners share their experience with our mutual activities and projects, their experience on working with the CEF, for example. And also, last but not least, we use the online learning campus, which enables learning through webinars as the current one. This is the CEF online learning campus. To mention that our experience from social media, from social media, is that the posts with the embedded videos more or less receive the highest amount of likes and views, for example, as this one. But all our colleagues from the USA department and happening, or as already mentioned, will tell us more useful tips about posting on social media. That will be in short what we do on digital communications at the CEF, and I would like to give the word back to my colleague, Polona.
Thank you much, Luca, for this presentation. We will continue with the presentation of Richard Medic. As I've already said at the beginning, Richard is the digital communication specialist and founder of Happeningo Communications and Soon Feed Media. Richard has been for the last 20 years helping European institutions, international organizations, and businesses communicate more creatively and effectively. Richard will speak about which channels to use for communicating the events, happenings, and he will also share tips on how to communicate there to reach bigger audience. So, Richard, the word is yours.
Hear me okay?
Yes, we do very well.
Okay. Everybody, my name's Richard. I'm Australian, so I'll try to neutralize my Australian accent a little bit. My parents are from Bosnia, so I have a background in the Balkan region. I think I live in Brussels, but I have quite a good insight into communicating in Southeastern Europe, but also in Brussels and at a European level. Talk about three things. Survey, I saw that beginners, about half of you consider themselves beginners, and the other half either intermediate or advanced. So I do think quite general. I want to present three ideas to you. A couple of them will be new to you. And I think they'll be useful not only for digital communications, but for communications. They're based on very basic principles that I've developed over the years in media and communications. So I'm hoping you'll get value out of them. Don't worry if you don't understand absolutely everything if you are a beginner. I think the point is if you can get all of the takeaways from the slides, then I'll certainly be happy. So first, something about real-time communications. It's also live content. Live content's a good example of real-time communications. Back in 2012, when I started dealing with live content, you might on the right of the screen, Felix Baumgartner jumping from the edge of space. 2012, it was the Red Bull publicity stunt. There are 8 million people watching live online on YouTube. So it was a live video happening until that point. There's been bigger ones since, but really a turning point in digital communications, because suddenly live was possible. At the top left, you've got Barack Obama, who hosted a Reddit Anything session. If you're familiar with Reddit, it's a platform where anybody can post basically anything, and it's upvoted or downvoted. It works a little like a social network. The key is a tough one to crack for communicators. It's not one I would suggest you dive into easily. But thanks for that link, for posting a link. But Obama in 2012 crashed the servers because so many people turned up to his live chat. They're called AMAs, or Ask Me Anything sessions. They're all very interesting. But again, that was in 2012, around the same time as Felix Baumgartner jumped from the edge of space. And that was also a real turning point in live chats. The picture here I've included, this was I'm going into the details of the protest, but back in 2012, 100,000 websites, including Wikipedia, had blacked out, protest some legislation in the US. And that was also a really big moment, again, within a few weeks of these other two happenings, where there was a coordinated effort to do something live, and it had an effect. They did block the legislation. Since 2012, live content has evolved. You have, where in 2012, live streaming was really something for professional camera teams and editors. It was something that you could do yourself, but you needed some technical knowledge. Whereas these days, you're able to live stream from mobile phone, from any device, from any camera. You can do it on any social network. Started with Meerkat and Periscope, which were apps that were capable, or Periscope has since been acquired by Twitter. And the last 12 months or so, you've probably noticed Facebook Live having a big impact in social media. For me, the moment was a few months ago when my older sister, Australia, she's in her 60s, she's live streaming pretty much every day something on Facebook. And I thought, since 2012, when I first started working in real-time communications, things have come a long way. I think live content has become mainstream, and I think you need to try it if you haven't already, particularly those of you who feel more comfortable on social media. It's very easy to do live streams these days, live chats and other type of live content, such as Facebook Live, Google Hangouts. They're not so anymore. They're using Hangouts, but the concept is still interesting. Small groups of people. If you're at an event, if you're hosting a conference, if you're attending a conference, if you're attending any situation where you think that posting live highlights, not to live feeding whole events necessarily, listing a few good quotes, photos, videos from an event with a hashtag is a really quite easy, simple, effective way to use live content and real-time comms. Streaming, which I've already talked about, but as it's not just Facebook Live, live chats, what I call live social, which encompasses posting on Instagram, post Facebook, posting things in real time from events, live blogs, live radio, and discount the power of radio and audio. There's a lot to be said for live content, which is just audio focused. Blogs are very interesting. Out of your organizations have some form of blogging, but blog is always a good option if you'd like to draw attention to a big upcoming event, something that you think is important enough to blog about. You may well start the blog early and create a live blog and update your audience on how the event preparations are going. Start telling a story before it starts. Here's one example of what I call live community building. A live chat on Twitter, it was a few years ago when lives were still relatively new. Working with US, consulting for US, which is, for those who don't know, the job mobility network. They have over, I think, 1 million jobs, 1 million CVs, and encourage mobility between EU countries and labour workforces. So the live chat they didn't have in Madrid or in Spain, Spain didn't have a Twitter account of their own. They used a European Commission account in this case. And that account gained about 2,000 followers as a result of that 60-minute live chat. So bring people, crowds together around scheduled moments online is a really great way to build a community and to build a following. I've included here a couple of graphics talking about the benefits in particular of engaging in the first hour or so after you post something. If you post something and if you're expecting comments, most of them will come in the first hour, so be around if you can to answer them. Communications. This is the second idea I'll talk about. I mentioned live blogging and the value of starting your story early. So not necessarily waiting until you're ready to officially announce and promote an event, for example. Before time communications is essentially everything that comes before real time. Right? There's the land before time. That's where I took the before time term from. And I use it quite regularly and introduce people to this concept because I do think it's a very valuable approach and methodology. You can use digital comms, social media, but also for other types of communication. The principles apply no matter what you're doing. Full representation of what I'm talking about. If you look at moments as happenings online, the moment you post something on Facebook, the moment you live tweet something, the start a live stream, your event begins in the morning, or one of the sessions at the event, the keynote speaker at the event. Any sessions I refer to as happenings. They're moments that people want to be at, that there is some audience that you connect with. And the diagram or this little chart, I've simplified greatly, but essentially what I want you to get from this is that for your event, the earlier you start, the more you'll reach, the more you'll to engage when it happens, and the more influence you'll have after it happens. So you'll increase on investment simply by starting earlier. Don't your campaign, your ideas, your social media posts, schedule them way in advance and just wait for them to go online. Go ahead and post. It's better to post twice before something happens than waiting until you've perfected it and just doing it once. And I'll talk more about that in a second. This is a graphic that I see on what I call the Guru Ninja Thought Leader blogs. The experts in social media, who quietly say that you can double your traffic to a website by sharing on multiple occasions, not just once. So if you've published a blog or published an announcement, a project, it doesn't matter what it is. Publish it's we know that you're going to publish on all the social networks that you have available. And what happens after that is unclear in many cases. You might decide just to publish it once, to post once about it. Wherever you post about it afterwards, the better returns will be. Especially on Twitter, where tweets are lost in a couple of hours. They'll see it on the same day. Facebook, less so. So you tend to see Facebook posts popping up a day or two later. Google Plus I've put here and Tumblr as examples, but the same examples apply for LinkedIn. So you on LinkedIn post too much, it would be something like the frequency of Facebook and forms. So the point here is that by posting on multiple occasions on social media, you can double the traffic that you have to a website. And that's after time. but I slightly adjusted the popular visual, and I've created this triple traffic by also sharing before time. So in waiting until you publish or until you plan to publish something, have a look at opportunities to publish it earlier, to start posting about it earlier. Right? So the earlier, I repeat, the earlier you start communicating, the better the returns. You're able to start the story early, you expand lifespan, you reach more people, as triple your social traffic, use what's called social signals, which is one of the metrics that drives search engine optimization. The more your content is shared on social media, the better you'll rank in Google searches, for example. So the longer your content is online and the more you communicate about it, the earlier you start communicating about it, the SEO you'll generate as a result. You're able to test, fail, and learn early. And I think Matt will be talking a little bit about the experimentation. I'm a big fan of experimentation, and I'm not ashamed to say I fail much more than I succeed. I keep my failures low key. So I test very early. I test it with small audiences. I look for a big bang launch. I do, smaller soft launches before. Some people refer to it as foreplay, like marketing foreplay, but a little bit like that. So test, fail, and learn early, and get into good planning habits. You're working on communicating something, the better planning habits will be. I've got a couple of examples here, and perhaps I'll show these case studies at the end. These are a couple of EU-centered campaigns, but at the end of time, I'll be very, very quick. Lean communications. Experimenting, I mean building something or testing, experimenting, measuring, and learning from it. And that loop. So the idea of testing is ideas, experimenting, connecting with adopters, so the people who are most likely to be fans of your content or to share your content. Run by them first, get their opinion. Don't worry about how a landing page looks at the beginning. If you have very little in terms of visuals or other content, just get a landing page up there. Have something that you can bring traffic to early. Very important, in testing, you need to measure. There's no point testing if you don't measure the results. So establish some key indicators, what your return on investment will be, monitor and analyze the results, and use that to learn. I'm a fan of split testing, and I'm not a fan of vanity metrics. Vanity metrics are, for example, the number of followers you have. Because this is great for reporting, but it doesn't really tell you how you can do better, because you can get followers by paying for ads and other black hat techniques as well. But much better to learn how to, by measuring and learning, to improve your content and get an organic following. Finally, by learning, I mean data-driven learning. So measure your results and learn from that. Speak to the community, ask them what they think of your new visual, your new cover photo, video. Get their opinion before you do your big launch on something. And what's called the startup, the lean startup approach, what I'm talking about in terms of lean communications. So you can Google the lean startup and you'll see a lot more about how startups are using this approach. I use it in communications, but the principles apply basically as it in life as well. Persevere is the last thing I've mentioned here about lean. When I persevere, if you see that content or your community building or whatever communications you're doing is not doing well, then either pivot, change it a little bit, or persevere. Keep going. This is something you only know. The decision-making process is really down to how you measure and learn. So build, measure, learn. I will show you just as a final example. or a couple of years of. I understand that with the work you do, one of the challenges for you is packaging, numbers and facts and content which might be dry for a larger audience, but making it interesting. So it started already, but I created a tweet chat with an annual thing with Schumann, who's the father of Europe, who's been dead, as you can see here, for 52 years, now 55 years. We did this in 2015, but we've done it each year since. And I show that a tweet chat with the dead father of Europe can engage more people than a chat with many living politicians. And indeed it was. We had about 130 people involved in the chat. But this link is in my presentation. I can send it if you'd like. I've here a countdown of 30 days where we started communicating before time and what we did to promote the chat. So we created visuals using Robert Schumann's likeness, set up Twitter accounts. We created a little video which was like this House of Cards style, if you know how cards. I send people to tweet a question before time. People know. So essentially, it's a bit like planting a question from a journalist in a press conference. For those with how press conferences are often run, but asking people to ask a good question was a good way to kick off the discussion. It's a little bit when you see on a Facebook post or a blog post comments, much more likely to join those than if you see nothing. So get your friends, get your colleagues, get somebody to start the discussion. And in the end, we trended in Belgium, which was good. There was a big Juncker press conference, EU President's press conference, but we managed to compete with him. So that's an example of packaging otherwise quite dry EU type of themes into something interesting. And finally, how much longer do I have? Do I have a couple minutes?
You have a couple of more minutes, Richard. So.
Okay, so I'll mention one more thing. I mention it because I mention it everywhere I go. This is another project we did to promote what's called the New Narrative for Europe. The European Commission by DG EAC, which runs, for example, Erasmus Plus program and the national agencies. They wanted to hear ideas from young Europeans for future EU policies. And the challenge for them was connecting with young people who otherwise really don't care about the EU. They don't vote in European elections. They target audience that are too often ignored by EU institutional communications, and this is an ongoing challenge in Brussels. So I used to be a musician many years ago, and I tell people this was my midlife crisis, doing a 6-month project where I got to be a musician again and write music. So I wrote this song, we did video, and we didn't do any official promotion or marketing or advertising using the European Commission social media accounts. We did it via our own networks and via our SoonFeed network. And we recorded a song in Mostar, actually, if any of you know Mostar, which is in southern Bosnia and Herzegovina, which my team is based. There, we filmed it around Europe, Poland, Barcelona, and Warsaw. I did summer version in Mostar, which you can see, that's my daughter. She wrote the words. So one of the challenges we encountered is when communicating in multiple languages, should you choose or do you try to translate? And a song is a tough one. So we decided my gave me the inspiration to invent the words. So we invented words so that English people wouldn't be offended, the French wouldn't be offended, nobody could be offended if the words are by a 2-year-old girl. And the song's done very well. I'm encourage cover versions if anybody everybody knows musicians. It's copyright free. Deliberately did that because a great way to spread content is to let other people mix and do what they want with it. You're trolled, perhaps you do that, but it's engage with your audience and to take a risk occasionally. Sure, you'll fail, but if you do it early enough and often enough, in the end you'll succeed. So this is one project which is, I'm hoping it'll become an unofficial track for Europe, not an anthem, but yeah, this is one example of digital comms. Used before time communications. This is a blog, an example I mentioned earlier about live blogging early, and create a story and building a story over time. So it's real-time communications, before-time communications, and lean communications wrapped up into one. Presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. We received a couple of questions I can see here in the chat, but we will address them right after Matthew's presentation at the end. So I invite now Matthew Jacobs, who is Digital Coordinator for the Bureau of Eurasian Affairs at the U.S. Department of State. Share his presentation. Just a couple of words, more words. So Matthew serves as the Chief Digital Strategist for the Bureau, working to develop and refine how the Bureau and its missions use digital communication channels to engage foreign priorities and initiatives. In his presentation, he will share how government institutions can successfully approach digital communication. So, Mace.
Everyone hear me? The obligatory check.
We can hear you well.
Perfect. All right. Well, before I start, I just want to thank CEF for giving me the opportunity to speak. I've had the opportunity to work with CEF twice now, and both times actually in Ljubljana, and I believe that anyone who's able to join the webinar today is benefiting greatly from their dedication and from their just perseverance to making sure that these types of things get out. So you're all quite lucky. And then also to thank Richard for his presentation. As someone who also is organizing these conferences, I think I want to email you afterwards to see if we can get out to any one of the events that I'm organizing. And I think we might click quite well because I'm also a displaced musician. So yeah, it seems to be a common trend in this field. So as I said, I'm Matt. I am the digital coordinator for the Bureau of European Eurasian Affairs. And as Polona mentioned, I am charged with making sure that our missions are capable of engaging in effective 21st century diplomacy and communications mechanisms. But a huge component of my work is actually working with strategic partner governments to ensure that they too have the core capacities and competencies to engage in the same ways that we do and that various elements of the private sector do, because as we have witnessed and kind of identified over the last couple of years, the digital environment is much richer and much more positive when everyone can come to play. So making sure that some of our strategic allies are just right there alongside us, being able to advance their own messages, policy rich, informative, and accurate is integral to our work. And but as part of this, I've had a number of opportunity to go visit with a number of governments and government communicators who are looking to really tap into the digital space. And I, deciding, this really being the contrarian, I decided that what I'm going to do is tell you what to do by telling you what not to do. Some of the kind of institutional and structural inadequacies or mistakes that I've noticed over the years and how we can kind of get around that. So this is going to be beneficial, particularly for those who either lead a team or have some clout on their team and are looking to kind of start this up and make sure that when they do start up their digital communications initiatives, that they're getting off on the right foot with 6 or 7 core ideas being laid out there. So let's get to the first one. The first, recognizing the importance of digital communications. So this is an absolutely devastating mistake, because if you make this mistake, it's very hard to move past it and get to the 6 or 7 mistakes that you have to make in order to, you should be avoiding in order to have a strong digital communication structure. Because if you can't get past this one, you're not going to get to the rest, and you're kind of out of the game. And this is something that I think was endemic maybe a couple of years ago, but is now starting to really kind of walk away. And that's that people look at digital communication channels as kind of supplemental or a fad. Really, the core precept is that digital media has radically shifted how government should and can engage with their audiences. I mean, the proliferation of digital media resources have completely eroded the boundaries or perceived boundaries between an individual who creates media and an individual who consumes media. Represents a huge shift in power dynamics and paradigms in information flows. Saw this in it's like what happened in Iran, what happened in the Arab Spring, what happened in Kyiv, when we were able to see that normal, ordinary citizens and just were able to get out a message, circumventing, say, some of the governments who had their own message or were trying to block theirs. And this has completely just upended the table in terms of who owns the narrative. Now it's gone from one person putting a narrative out to many people putting out a narrative to everyone. And so recognizing that fundamental shift is critical in understanding where we as communicators need to be focusing our efforts for the future. I think that honestly kind of freaks out a lot of governments. We're very known for sticking to our lane, like we're going to put out a press, we're going to give this to the newspaper, we're going to give this to a television studio. Having that kind of democratized information flow can be, people see it as a crisis. But really, we need to move people to seeing it as an opportunity. And once we can get there, we can really start engaging with it. The mistake is not developing a proper strategy. Now, this is like the least interesting thing that anyone really wants to hear, is that you have to invest some thought into developing a plan for when you want to have digital media. But this is like one of the core things that I see kind of driving down or kind of the efforts of government communicators as they really look to emerge and get into this space, is that they just don't have a really well-developed or well-fleshed out plan. And when I say that, I mean our government too, until the last couple of years, didn't really have a core strategy into how we're going to use digital communication channels. We were just opening up accounts left and right. There was no real governance structure. There was no real nomenclature. There was no branding or marketing considerations. And it's a mess. And I think that we're kind of trying to pick it up now. But since we had to deal with that, we want to kind of get it, get out to you guys. So generally, and I'm going to contradict myself here in a moment, so I'm just going to caveat that right here, is that outreach, it can be directed through a single platform, whereas outreach is part of a multifaceted digital engagement approach. And we usually call this when you have various platforms that you use to achieve different purposes and that you use to advance different areas of a department's mission set as being part of a digital ecosystem. And it's critical that when you're thinking about developing this digital ecosystem, you're really developing it as a reflection of your organization and your organization's goals, and not what you just happen to think might be appropriate because other people are doing it. So, for example, the department has, I think, at least, not all missions, but the department itself has at least 13 different social media channels that there are digital communication channels that they're putting content out. So, which is a lot. Our missions, on the other hand, usually have 3 or 4. And that is because the mission is structured differently than the department itself. An embassy has fewer people, has fewer resources, also has fewer issues that it's looking to tackle. And has a more nuanced audience, whereas the department in general, who is looking to communicate with the entire world as well as a domestic constituency, because we count ourselves as separate, that's a Freudian slip, strike that on the record, is that they kind of go out to these larger ecosystems to kind of get their message across. one of the things that I've seen that's really kind of held people back is that they try and build this ecosystem out so quickly and so broadly that they actually aren't able to source it. And I saw a question about this in the chat space. Was what do you do this with a small team? How can you really work on this? Well, with a small team, start small. And start figuring out, okay, if we can open up 2 platforms, what are those going to be based on the people in our particular audience that we're looking to communicate with, based on the model that we're trying to apply? Are we trying to be kind of more of a just pushing stuff out? Are we trying to engage, as Richard was talking about, in a kind of two-way conversation? Really think about that, and then start small. And if you figure out that you're building your core competencies here, building your audiences, that's when you go and say, okay, you know what, I've heard about we get some sort of direct messaging things. We want to get on Viber, or we want to get on WhatsApp, and we want to send out messages through that way. Really start at that small level and build out. Otherwise, it risks kind of falling on top of itself. And as I've always said to my missions in the field, it's better to have fewer well-resourced pages, have a great number of poorly resourced, poorly content-filled pages. It's just it's not a good branding look, and it makes it look like you're not taking the element seriously, which we'll get to in a bit. The third one, not knowing what they want. So this gets to something that Richard also talked about, which is government have to be purposeful in their messaging in digital. I think this has to do with the fact that people didn't come into government work or into communications focusing on digital communications more broadly. A lot of people who come into this work actually, or who have to deal with it as part of their portfolio, came in from using it in a very kind of non-professional, just casual manner, and bring that bias, their previous experience, to the work itself. When really, as communicators, we should always be cognizant of what we're trying to achieve through any means of communication, whether that's through digital communication or more kind of traditional communications, press releases, interviews, and so forth. And that is public affairs and public diplomacy, really always looking at behavioral and attitudinal changes. We understand, inform, and influence members of the public in order to advance our own policy agendas, our own goals. So it's just warrants kind of keeping that in the back of your mind as you go out to communicate. If you need to be on, if you want to do a live chat, what are you trying to say with that live chat? What are you trying to get people to do? Are you trying to get people to know of a particular policy? Are you trying to get them to tune into the actual event or happening, as Richard called it? Are you trying to get them to go out and kind of actualize on your policies? Keeping that stuff in mind is absolutely critical and integral to your ability to craft messaging and to craft content that directs people to that ultimate aim. Which kind of leads into our next one, which is they don't give it the proper respect. This is something that I've encountered a lot through my work, and that is that people kind of treat digital communications as if it's the simultaneously the most and least important thing going on at any point in time. So it's, we didn't have time to think about what we're going to say about International Anti-Corruption Day, but we should have social content for it, so just kind of roll it out. Again, this gets back to the last thing. They don't know what they want, but in any form of communication, there would be a tendency to say, if we're going to be putting something out there, we need to put a lot of thought behind it and kind of perfect it before we release it. There's a little bit of a cognitive disconnect here, because only do governments and other institutions have the capacity to reach the largest number, the greatest number of people through the greatest number of audiences, segmented into various subgroups and specialized into different categories than ever before. We never had the capacity, and we've never been dealing with a communication medium where we have kind of at the same time such a short tail and such a long permanent tail to any of our content that goes up there. Yet we don't give it sometimes the same amount of thought we would invest in, say, the opening remarks that a principal officer might be giving, following a meeting. And I really think that a strong digital communications effort kind of rests on the premise that we're giving it the same, if not more, attention through and through the process. It needs to be treated as if it is just a just as much of a standard practice as any of the more traditional diplomacy routes. And this is also helpful in kind of eroding any perceived boundaries between what would be considered like traditional diplomacy versus supplemental digital diplomacy. One of the things is that people think they have the skills, but really, digital communications, if you're kind of noticing a theme, is really just an extension of communications more broadly. I believe that Secretary Kerry had a tweet that digital diplomacy is just diplomacy. So by extension, digital communications is just communications. Many of us who are in these jobs are in these jobs because we've had formal training, we've gone to school, we've kind of recognized the value that words play in being able to change behaviors and to impact circumstances and create action. All the same kind of learned and core competencies developed over your career just need to be translated to a different application, and that requires kind of understanding the medium. So, for example, if your principal officer was getting out there to talk about something, a new provision that is outlined in a new code, your principal officer isn't going to go out there and read the code verbatim. They're not going to read through 42 pages of legalese in order to convince people that this new code, this new regulation, is good for them and that they should be supported or be behind it. So why would you do that on digital? Why would you link to a 900-page EU regulation document in order to get the average person on Facebook or Twitter on your side? It doesn't really make a lot of sense. So it's about thinking about how do we translate the stuff that we've already known and just kind of bring it to this new application. How do we create sound bites? How do we create cool turns of phrases that we can publish on these platforms in order to make sure that these messages resonate with our audiences? So it's just a different application. So you think that you're completely new to this, I'm here. You're not. And that leads to one of our second to last, which is a lot of people embrace experimentation. So there's a tendency for people to go online and look at a digital influencer, say a really proficient YouTuber, or really strong and clever witty Twitterer, and say, well, these people just know what they're doing. They've got something that I don't, which is not entirely true. The one thing that they have is a certain level of experience and a tendency towards experimentation. If you look at the people who tend to be making the biggest splashes in the digital market, where they are doing so independently or hired through a company, these people learn to do this through experimentation, through their own kind of product they were putting out there, and they were just improving it in iterations. They might have started off with very little Adobe skill and were just using kind of Flash, and now they're moving towards professional production levels just because they sit at various iterations. And we as government communicators sometimes are a little bit reluctant to do that. We're very much, we need to be perfect here. We need to be perfect here. People are going to think we're going to get in trouble. People are going to, troll us. Our leadership isn't going to like it. But the problem is you can't get to the level that they're at unless you want to dole out a ton of money to get them, or to make those mistakes, and you're willing to kind of press leadership or press staff to allow for experimentation. And also, the side of that is you actually have to get on digital media a lot. You have to kind of just go to Facebook, go onto Twitter, go onto YouTube, and kind of look at what people are doing. Go onto blogs, highlight. Richard was talking about a couple different influencer blogs that he uses. Go onto those periodically and just learn about what's kind of happening in that space. Because if you're not fluent in the language of, say, your audience online, then what you create won't really speak to them as well. So give yourself time to learn, to observe, and to experiment. It's the quickest way to get better at what you do. And the next one is that we have an analog network. So often we see that digital communicators are kind of siloed into their one thing. They're individuals who, you're the computer person, you're just going to work on Facebook and Twitter. You're not involved in, say, the conversations about articulating press points or designing engagement strategies and calendars for principal officers, when really this should be a whole mission effort. This is something everyone should be feeding in, because digital is not independent of this. Digital is not an end in of itself. It's a means to an end, just like any of the other products that are being created. So kind of fostering relationships and interworkings between what you would call the traditional elements of, say, communications to, public diplomacy, public affairs, and digital is completely integral to ensuring that we have a strong network. It's also one of the best ways of preventing burnout and overworking, because you'll find that, as I mentioned earlier, everyone wants everything online, no matter if they've invested the time in actually putting up a coherent strategy or not. That's a lot of work for one person or two people to undertake. If you can kind of build an analog network to underpin your digital network, you're going to have a lot more support in that. You're going to have a better product, and you're going to be able to last a lot longer. And is that people don't ask for assistance. And I'm speaking specifically about asking other government representatives for assistance. So here's where I can give a plug for the network that I've developed that I know a few of your governments have participated in. I know the Slovenian government has, and some of the participants come from governments who joined at times. But we started a network called the European Digital Diplomacy Exchange, which is an intergovernmental network of communicators who are looking to advance their collective capacities at engaging in effective digital, 21st century statecraft, digital diplomacy, or just digital communications if you're not a diplomatic government institution. And we work together to make sure that we're all kind of keeping an eye on what's emerging out there. What are the newest kind of trends? What are the newest apps? What are the newest features? Because this field of practice is evolving at such a rate that it's so hard for any one individual to really keep up and to be able to represent that for their respective office, institution, whatever, and be able to produce content. So the more we can all support each other in this effort, the better we're all going to be. And as I mentioned at the top of the talk, is that the more people who can be involved in this fulsomely, the better the environment's going to be. So it's in everyone's best interest to kind of link up into these kind of larger networks and see what they can add to it and how they can benefit from it. And I know that CEF has a little bit of information about this network, and if you're interested in it at all, CEF can definitely give my contact information. I'd be more than happy to share some information with you guys about that. So with that, you guys should just go out, try it, as Richard said. So I wanted to change my slide to match his, but didn't have time. So just try it. Get out there, experiment, enjoy, have fun with it, and I'm sure you'll do great work.
Thank you very much, Matthew, for this. It was very interesting. As we now move to the questions and the discussion here at the chat, it was an interesting question here on the examples of question from Irina to you, actually, Matt, if you could, and I saw that you already gave her an answer, but maybe you can also comment aloud. So, what was of live communications from your missions? Because
sure. So actually, so it's good timing because I'm working with our mission at U.S. NATO to organize some live programs now ahead of the Defense Ministerial that kicks off tomorrow. So we tend to encourage our missions to really think about live broadcasts, as Richard said, as being a kind of more spectrum of different events. So, for example, if we're going to have a significantly large event, particularly something that involves, say, an assistant secretary, the Secretary of State, president, ambassador, sometimes, we tend to think about how we can use the pre and post time to really kind of zoom in on the policy points and the real messages that we want to convey during the actual event. So let's say the event is that our secretary is going to speak at the NATO Foreign Ministerial in a month. what we'd be encouraging our embassy at, at US NATO to go out and say, organize a pre-show before that. So what can they do to set up, say, a mobile video studio just through having some backdrops and by setting up Facebook Live on their phone or their iPad, announcing it and having a little kind of pre-show where they can kind of talk about the points that are going to be addressed by the Secretary, without giving away any big announcements that he's going to make, but kind of reiterating on the talking points that we've had before and engaging in discussion with someone who's maybe on the sidelines. So can we get another official from NATO, from a NATO ally country, to engage in just a conversation on screen about these points before this big, these big, kind of structured remarks. That way we can kind of get the audience in, we can kind of warm them up and kind of maybe kind of shadow or foreshadow some things that will come through in order to get people kind of receptive to it, to kind of lay the groundwork for people to understand the message coming out. And if we have the resources, generally it's harder on the post-show because we have to get principals out of there and there's follow-on meetings. But we generally like to do something like that on the post-show as well, where we then dissect what, say, the Secretary said with someone else and try and kind of break it down to the most understandable level about, what are these abstract policies are, how are they going to impact someone, what are the benefits to European audiences or to American audiences, and just try and kind of break it down like any sort of news show. This is something that has kind of worked for us in the past. It's a little labor intensive, and sometimes during these bigger events, these people are kind of voluntold to go, shepherds around, move tables. We've seen that we've been able to get significantly greater engagement throughout the spectrum of the presentation by having these available. And we like to feel as if we've been able to better communicate our policies through having these as well.
Okay, thank you for this answer. There was another question from Dung Wu Tien. You already answered to this, Matthew, but maybe Richard would want to comment as well. So actually, the question is the appropriate communication tools to engage a group of approximately 500 people into a community. So not a very huge group that you can use, where you can mass social media such as Twitter, Facebook, etc. What would be the appropriate tools for smaller groups of participants?
Is it a public group? So it depends if you want to keep it a closed group for a closed community interest type of collaboration, or talking public groups. If you're talking public ones and in fact private ones, LinkedIn, and you have to look at your audience, consider where that audience is. So as the expression goes, you need to fish where the fish are. Ask your audience, survey them, see what social networks they're using. If they're on Twitter, which probably won't be the best platform for a community like that, because the further you go towards Eastern Europe, the less Twitter penetration there is. It's about 2 or 3% of internet users in most of Eastern and Southeastern Europe at the moment. So there aren't that many Twitter users. Facebook might be interesting, but a lot of people prefer to use Facebook just for family, friends, personal stuff. They want to keep it separate from work. LinkedIn, I think, is a good option, because LinkedIn, you could set up groups. They can be closed groups by invitation or by acceptance only. And there you can build, I think, some nice communities built around niche topics. A good one was in Sweden, I believe, in a region of Sweden where they wanted to connect engineers with employers across the border. Quite a niche topic, and they did really well with the LinkedIn group. It was a couple hundred, I think, people in the group, but it was the right people that they wanted. So, question, I'd say if you want something public, where it's about 500 people, but other people are welcome to join if they meet your qualifications or what their interest should be. Then I would suggest something like LinkedIn. If you're a private closed group, then you could consider collaboration platforms. And Ning is one. I know that a good one is, I'll have to find the link. I used it a while ago, but there are tools like Yammer, for example, which is essentially a social network for internal communications. So yeah, again, depends what kind of community you're talking about.
Okay, thanks for this answer. I'm not sure if we got this information, whether it's private or public, but the answer was here for both options. So thank you. And then Silvana from the Central Bank of Ukraine. A question for Matt. And she's asking if you could specify how do you organize the work of the team, how the responsibilities of an engagement within the overall Department of State communication team is divided.
Thank you. So that could be a 30-minute conversation in and of itself, but I think I would say that in general you could think of it as a kind of a hub and spoke model. So we have the department who kind of centralizes communications, with the next layer being the regional individuals, for example, me and my colleagues and all the other various regional offices. And then beyond that next level are all the people at the various missions and the various embassies across the world. So we have a department who makes kind of really core policy decisions like we have computers. And then you have individuals like me who say, okay, we need to get on digital. Digital is the way that we need to be communicating about X, Y, and Z. Here are the platforms we can use. Here are the limitations to that. Here's what the lawyers say. And then people at the embassies themselves, the people who are most connected to, say, the audiences on the ground with whom they really need to communicate with on core key policy issues, either of departmental, bureau, or mission concern, can really decide, like, here's how we're actually going to apply that. So he says we can be on these 8 different platforms. We're going to be on these 4. So that's kind of how the chain of authority goes in terms of policy side. Now on the messaging side and kind of coordinating that's a whole different thing. It again kind of relies on the hub and spoke model, but that's where you have individuals like me who will figure out what are the key policies we're trying to advance as a bureau and what are the key policies the department are trying to advance. How to get these down and accessible in a model that'll be easily understood and easily utilized by people in the field. For example, I will generally send out a coordination email every night that's like 3 pages, and it has all of our press points on and kind of wrapped up into a succinct paragraph on a particular issue, and then here's how we plan on messaging about it. Here are the resources that are already there in terms of how we can curate material, how we can link on to other campaigns. Or, as Richard noted, when you have to kind of go for something that's kind of far off in the future, hey, we have this event in a month, we need to start thinking about this here. We need these embassies to be focusing on this, we need these embassies to be focusing on that, and we have to come together for a coherent plan. So I'll usually kind of coordinate that up here, package it, and sometimes even create content and send it out through a common distribution system like a content library on Hootsuite to field, who will then take that and say, all right, well, Matt seems to have written this for a Central European audience when really we're going to kind of tweak it for a Western European or an Eastern European. And they'll kind of just tweak it a little bit and they'll send it out. But that way, we've been able to ensure that all of our missions across the region are able to kind of sing from the same songbook, I think the expression goes. Use musician, I will remember that. Never use the songbook. They're all kind of speaking to the same points, and they're all hitting the same points pretty consistently, but in a manner that really applies to their particular audiences, which is a great way for us to kind of coordinate our approach more uniform across the region, making us look a little bit more professional than if we have only 7 of our posts talking about this big thing for the department, and the rest are kind of talking about whatever else they need to do. Then they're also given the added flexibility of being able to talk about the things that really matter to them, which are, for example, local content, things that really touch local audiences. So kind of build that next element that someone like me in Washington wouldn't particularly be able to speak to.
Matthew, for this detailed answer. Another question to both of you would be, you know, the Southeast European region, where what the most appropriate social media tools channels to use here. So, you think are efficient for government institutions to use here, perhaps?
Take an interesting approach on this. Oh, if you want to go first.
I just wanted to, perhaps extending from what I mentioned earlier, I think the platforms I talked about earlier, probably a question as well. Twitter, you want to reach influencers. There are influencers on Twitter in Southeastern Europe, but not many more after that. So if you want to reach a larger audience, Twitter's probably not the best channel for you. I know that in my experience with EU networks, IPALE is one, which IDA knows, or EURES and others like it, where they have national agencies. I said earlier, the further east you go, the less Twitter seems to have an impact, and advertising on Twitter hasn't really paid off for us in Eastern Europe and Southeast Europe. Facebook, however, is, I know in Southeastern Europe it's by far the most popular network, but you have to consider why people are there. They're there for friends and family news. They're not really there to be marketed to. They are there to be engaged with. So if you find ways to engage people on Facebook that isn't as formal as something you might do on LinkedIn or a newsletter, Facebook can certainly pay off. I think LinkedIn is certainly growing in Southeast Europe and can be a good option. Since they're probably the three that I would consider. You look at Instagram and the mobile apps and other networks that are geared towards younger people, such as Snapchat. I don't know how effective something like Snapchat or other tools like it would be in Southeast Europe. I've never used it in Southeast Europe, and I have no intention to for a while.
Yeah, I think Instagram is one of the fastest growing platforms in Southeast Europe right now, but just I think the application that many of you are looking to use it for, I don't really see it as being there. I don't think that's what people go there for, and so this gets to one of those kind of areas I talked about in my presentation. Is like, just because it's there doesn't mean you have to be there. If people are using it to connect with governments, then and with institutions and people in that kind of like dealing with serious content, then there's nothing being there, even if they are the growing at exceeds any of the other networks. If there actually becomes a use case, then maybe consider it, but at the moment it's not right there. And then everything else Richard said is on. The one thing that I kind of see as being somewhat problematic, and this tends to happen more in Central Europe than it does in Eastern, is the kind of expectations. So this government is using this, so why isn't this government using this? Would kind of come into play, but as long as you give access to that same level of content and you figure out where to do it from, you can kind of overcome that. So again, just kind of think about really, what you want to achieve. As Richard said, if you want to be able to go someplace or somewhere looking for news, but with a little bit more of engagement towards that news instead of just a megaphone, Facebook's a good option. If you're looking to just quickly contact journalists, elites, politicians, academics, is still there. You're not getting anyone much further than that in Eastern Europe, but that's still fine if that's your goal, is to really kind of trigger discussion among elites in a society. So just again, kind of think back to your goals and how those goals align with your mission, and see if you can marry those up with a particular platform.
Can I add one more thing? Because the question, I think, was specifically for social media, but if I can extend it, if we're talking about digital communications, in Southeastern Europe, in my experience, probably the most effective form of digital comms has been newsletters, just mails. It'd be the case with most countries in Europe, but I've switched much more work to social from newsletters. But direct mailing, particularly if you experiment. So experiment with, for example, testing 2 emails with 2 different subject lines, keep everything else the same in the email, in the newsletter, see which one is being opened more. There are tools like MailChimp, other free tools, and probably your institutions have an in-house tool perhaps, but you're able to track who opens it, it was opened, what they're clicking on. You can get really valuable information. You can also connect people on social media using your newsletter with calls to action. So it's also a good option.
Okay, thank you very much for this detailed answer from both of you. Another question for you, Richard. Do you have any other cases of successful or interesting communications packaging that make these dry or unattractive contents more interesting for wider public?
There are some examples on my blog. I wasn't planning to plug the blog, but it's happening Go blog if you just Google it. But I do some case studies there of our work, at least. When it comes to case studies of EU actions in packaging, actually dry topics, it's a challenge. I can say in my experience, visualizing your content is crucial. If you're presenting numbers, if you're presenting facts and figures, remember that people care about facts and figures. People connect with an emotion. They don't care what you're telling them. They care what they feel when you're telling them. So it's one thing to present facts. It's great to present facts and figures, but find a way to present it that will connect with people. A simple example is we did one campaign a while ago. It was the benefits of EU as opposed to the disadvantages of EU membership. And this was a Balkan region campaign. And we just put beside the other, unemployment rate in Southeast Europe, this many percent, I can't remember how much it was. Unemployment rate in the rest of Europe, much lower, obviously. So juxtaposing 2 things side by side is a good way, for example, to create emotional reaction in people without, upsetting them or anything. It's, that's one example. But I can fish out a couple of examples and leave the links with you guys.
That would be very interesting to see. Perhaps, Matt, any examples to share of how to package the, let's say, less interesting or dry contents for wider public?
Yeah, again, Richard kind of nailed it with that one, is that, and this is, again, something that's kind of rooted in communications experience more broadly, which is news and stories can carry much more information than just the pure facts. Pure facts are great for being able to help develop a narrative, but if you can't hit it to a kind of resonant or emotional core, you're less likely to be able to capitalize on those kind of cognitive heuristics and cognitive biases we use when being able to process information and retain information. So I think that this is actually something that's not just limited to the digital space, but figuring out how to, as communicators, how to package kind of denser, drier stuff into something that's understandable, relatable, and engaging is our core. The core reason we have jobs. And I think one of my favorite examples is to kind of piggyback off of Richard's conversation was that we were working with the government who had signed an SAA with the EU, and there was a little bit of misinformation coming out about how this would impact a particular agrarian sector, and the kind of information getting to the people in the agrarian sector was, jobs are gone, you're ruined, you're not going to have money to feed your family, done. That was that simple, and it really got to that emotional core, that fear, that's something that really strikes something in an individual to get them to kind of feel and engage. Granted, it was negative and it wasn't true at all. But government to respond ended up just saying, hey, that's not true. See, in this document, and they sent out the entire text of the SAA. Like these people in the agrarian sector were going to have time to go through this SAA, 900 some odd pages of legalese, understand and have their fears put to rest. I mean, I love government stuff, and I'm here, chose this profession. I never read a 900-page SAA, so why would an ordinary citizen be able to get that and connect with it? So instead, what we did is we actually had them go out, and we recommend that they go out and kind of work with these people and kind of show them to actually go and have a conversation with individuals where they could express, what were the benefits of this regulation, and what were they going to gain from, what newer equipment were they going to get, what kind of newer subsidies were they going to get, and then not to shy away from the things that might change about their sector, but to engage with them and talk about how it was going to be better for them. So the video and being able to have the video of this, or the stories of having people kind of talking about this kind of benefit the EU membership for this particular state, it tended to play a little bit better in that when it got to getting people there, because because it did the story of an individual, it showed the story of someone who might be impacted, and it hit at the same kind of heartstrings that allowed that kind of misinformation to kind of spread.
Thank you very much. For the end, so how to influence government decision makers in the region to become open or not afraid to use digital communications. So as practitioners, it's difficult or very difficult to convince ministers, central bank governors to proactively communicate all messages. They're not so good messages. So how to decision makers to become more open to digital communications?
Well, government, for their flexibility and their tendency towards innovation and quick thinking and news. So I mean, so obviously, this problem, shouldn't be there, but it's a huge thing. We have it still here, where I have to push for us to be able to message on a particular event in a certain way. I think the do it is to kind of get your foot in the door with even just small things like having your Facebook page, being able to kind of show demonstrative results, being able to show that, hey, we message on this and this reached this many people in this way. We got this kind of feedback from it, which is going to allow us to I forget how you phrased it, Richard, but essentially, tweak the message or stay the course. And so we're not only are we reaching more people, but we're getting live feedback from our, identified audience about how to make the message better. And so we're getting told how to do our job better in order to reach more people and more people and more people in kind of iterative fashion. I believe leadership kind of responds to that, especially if you show them the amount of time or investment that was put into that. Because at the beginning, you're not necessarily going to get the full support. They're not going to give you the staff. They're not going to give you the access to the people designing the, say the talking points or any of the plans. But if you say that, hey, we did this independently, it took 2 hours to get this thing out, and you're able to generate these kind of results, those results tend to get people moving in the right direction, or at least that's been my experience working with governments across Europe and my own. Results tend to get people to be a little bit more comfortable with the work you're doing.
I'd also add that first thing I always ask in that situation or ask myself is, what is their incentive? Find an incentive for your minister, for your manager, for whoever you have to convince. If the incentive is, we want positive publicity, or we want to sell this message, or to influence people in this or that way, just find out what their incentive is, what their incentive is, and guarantee you can find ways, you can find enough arguments for digital communications, enough data proving how effective digital communications will be, achieving whatever their incentives, objectives are. A Google search will do that for you. So I think for me, the most important thing is just find out the incentives that you're dealing with, because as you know, often there will be different incentives at different levels in the hierarchy. Appealing to the incentives of each of those levels is really important, and then you're halfway there already.
Okay, very much for all this interesting and very useful input that you provided. Thank you for the presentations to all three of you, and for all the questions. Wrap up, maybe we have to keep in mind to engage in the channels that where audience are, and to keep in mind that the messages has to be understandable. Perhaps else that you would like to add for the end, Richard and Matthew and Luca?
Don't be afraid to fail. Just fail quickly and fail often.
Okay.
Echo that.
Clear message. Yes.
At this point, thank you again for your time, for your input, and just for all the participants. I hope this was useful, and you will be able to apply the knowledge to your work. Some information that this webinar is just one in the series of the CEF webinars. I invite you to also see webinars and other learning initiatives on our website and on our online learning campus, and to enroll there. At this point, thank you again and goodbye.